All right, folks, welcome back to The Slice. Host Stephen Boughton here, joined by the legendary Mark Rowe of TSN Tennis, who spent his summer down in Flushing Meadows covering the US Open in person, interviewing all the players and people that we love. Mark Rowe, thanks for joining the show. How are you?
Thanks for the legendary intro. I don't know if I've earned that title quite yet in my career, but it's great to be back on with you.
Yeah, well, I'd like to speak it into existence. I know, you're the guy, that most Canadians see down there in the.
If you said it, it's got to be true, right?
That's true. It is true. Yeah. So we're talking about we're going to be doing like a Canadian, basically year-end wrap up. If you guys have been watching the channel, which I hope you have, if you're watching this video, I just spoke with Dennis and Felix last week when they finished their years in Stockholm. So you can see their kind of answers to some questions there. Mark and I are going to opine about, how was the year of 2021 for Canadian tennis, and what are realistic expectations going into 2022 with our four top players who we all know who they are. So Mark, first things first, though, I want to hear what was your experience like this year at the US Open? TSN had an amazing set. You got to talk to so many amazing players and, reconvene with Bianca, who you covered in 2019. Cover Leylah's run to the final this year. And what I was saying is Mark Rowe is the lucky charm for Canadian women's tennis. Every time, the last two times he's been physically at the US Open, we've had amazing results.
Yeah. And if I could get on the payroll of some of these players, that would be even better, right?
That's the next step.
Yeah, that's the next step. I appreciate that. It was a great experience. It's funny, back in 2019, being there when Bianca won the US Open, you think, this is as good as it ever gets, and that's fine. And it's not to say that going back in a Canadian not winning would be a bad experience, but somehow this past year exceeded it, even though that, Leylah didn't win in the final. I think it was the fact that, it seemed like every single night we had a Canadian in prime time, or we had a Canadian playing in a big match, and, have with TSN investing in our set, and which I thought looked great on camera, and it seemed like our coverage was better. It seemed like we were able to get analysts. I got to give a lot of credit to our guy Vasek Pospisil, who, after he lost, he hung out at the US Open for pretty much the whole tournament. He was hitting a lot with Novak. And he kind of gave me the heads up, like, I'm not going anywhere. So if you guys ever want me, and it's one of those things where, like, if you're going to say that, I'm going to actually call on you for that. He was like, no problem.
I'm going to use you.
Had him on all the time. And I don't think you get that without a set, without, kind of your own sort of, destination at the US Open with that kind of footprint. So it was a great experience. It was definitely the most exhausting tournament that I have been a part of. And I don't expect any sympathy from anyone watching this. I'm at the US Open, but definitely the longest days that we've ever had. It involved waiting for Bianca at 3 a.m. for her to come out of getting some therapy on her leg. And we're set up to interview her, and suddenly the sprinklers went off in the players' garden. And we had to get all of our equipment out of that spot, obviously, as you can imagine the damage. And I was thinking, she's going to come out right now. And no player wants to do those interviews after they lose.
Yeah.
And she's probably not in a great mood, and know that we kind of know each other a little bit. Anyways, it ended up being fine. But, we missed the last shuttle back to Manhattan. We had to get into a taxi, and as we're in this taxi at 3:30 in the morning, I'm thinking we're back here in 5 hours. That's that's the beauty of covering a tournament like this, or covering the Olympics. You're not there to sleep. You're not there to go sightseeing. You're there to hopefully cover a great event. And every single day the US Open gave us great storylines, and it was just the fans being there, even better than pre-pandemic. I think it was just everyone was so built up to do something. And it was unbelievable. Even better, I can't believe I'm saying this, even better than Serena being in a US Open final, at least from my experience and what I heard inside that building.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that what you described there, you're on the front lines. That's the hard-hitting journalism that, I think Canadians, we're built for it, being from the cold, getting down there. Everything's more of a struggle up here, I feel. But yeah, that's kind of a memory. I was kind of now thinking back to the US Open, that everyone was saying it. That's one of the best Grand Slam tournaments they've ever experienced, right? Which I think it was a bit of the COVID, like, oh, wow, it's amazing to have fans back, but just the level of matches start to finish in that tournament on the men's and the women's, was just epic. And yeah, so that was awesome having you bring us the coverage from there with the Canadian angle. And yeah, that's what we're going to break down now. We had Canadian tennis, through the years, it's grown, and I really feel like they've done an amazing job to get us where we're at. We have two like top players on both the men's and the women's. So to recap this year, what did Canadian tennis produce as far as results? We had one title, that was Leylah in Monterrey. We had one Grand Slam final, 2 Grand Slam semifinals, 4 Grand Slam quarterfinals from our player. So, that's some pretty good, those are pretty good results. That's a lot of prize money. That's a lot of points. But why don't we go down the list, starting with the boys, and just kind of recap their years and talk a little bit about their highs and their lows, and going into 2022, what they're gonna think. So Dennis Shapovalov, kind of one of the OGs guys on the scenes. Now he's the oldest of the group, which is crazy. He's 22 years old. He went 30 wins, 23 losses, no titles. He made the Wimbledon semifinals, as we all know. Yeah, what do you think? How do you think this year was for him, as far as maybe what his expectations would have been or his hopes would have been at the beginning of the year?
I think, and he's commented on this a few times, just how inconsistent the year was. And I think you saw in flashes just how good he is and is going to be. And I think obviously Wimbledon's the greatest example of that, reaching a semifinal where, he really had Novak Djokovic uncomfortable. And I think it's a big learning lesson. It's going to have to be for Dennis to understand what went wrong. Like why did I have things kind of on my terms, and suddenly how is someone like Novak, and it's tough to compare yourself to the greatest player in the world right now. How is he able to turn things around so quickly and win that match? Outside of Wimbledon, it's probably a disappointing year. And that's just because the bar is so high for Dennis. He's been a top 10 player already. He's reached a few quarterfinals at Grand Slams. He was really hard on himself at the US Open. And that really struck me talking to him after that match against Lloyd Harris. And I still think there was some of the aftermath. I think he was still trying to, I think that took a toll on him. But Dennis usually after losses, in my experience, finds the positives and often says, I thought I played really well, and, credit to him or credit to my opponent, or maybe this happened. And I always compared Felix and Dennis, and always thought, Felix was so hard on himself, and Dennis often saw kind of the glass half full. It was the complete opposite. He just said, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Lloyd. I was just awful. How can I win hitting shots like that or making those mistakes? And he was right. He didn't play well, and he had all these kinds of unforced errors. So I think that he's always going to be that guy, the home run hitter, the guy who goes for the big shots. That's why he's one of the most exciting and most popular players on tour. He's got to find a way to rein it in a little bit. And when he doesn't have those big shots going, to gut out a win, to find a way, the line that you often hear, especially from a guy like Brad Gilbert, win ugly, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, if Dennis can't win the way that he prefers to, he lets that affect him a little too much. So yeah, I think he'll be fine. I just think when you look back at this year, there's a lot of missing links there. He wasn't able to carry Wimbledon into any really big tournaments moving forward, and wasn't able to play the French Open after having a pretty good clay court season, lost to Felix at the Australian Open. So yeah, I think that, Dennis should be doing better at this point, and I'm sure he will do better. And I think 2022 will be even a better year for him.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't say he's, he did tell me after Stockholm, where he had a bit of a run back to form, where he said, he thought this year was better than last. And statistically, it might not have actually been. Like, I think he had a better record in the year before, but I guess he feels like he grew in some ways, which is good. But he did say, like, I remember in San Diego, someone asked, like, hey, what are your goals for the end of the year? He's like, yeah, I don't really have any. Just like, it was kind of just like, he literally said that. And I was like, oh, it's like, he's definitely lost some motivation. And then he like agreed with that in Stockholm, where he's like, yeah, the Wimbledon loss somehow took a lot out of him, when it's like, you shouldn't blame yourself. You just lost to arguably the greatest tennis player of all time. And, but yeah, I think people talk about floors and ceilings with players' levels, right? And, Shapovalov, as far as the ceiling, has one of the highest ceilings probably on the tour. When he's playing his absolute best, not many guys can hang with him. But I feel like to really get super consistent, he has to bring his floor up because his bottom level can get beaten by a lot of players, because he doesn't he kind of beats himself with his bottom level in a way. Right. So I think.
And we'll be like obsessed, obviously, with records and titles, and that's just our job. And it comes down to Dennis or Felix. They know better than we do. Maybe the results aren't reflective of how well they think they actually are playing, or maybe they're working on things that might take a year to really add that shot into their arsenal. And I think both players have kind of talked about that. So it's not that it's not that I disagree with his idea that maybe he's a better player today. I'm sure he is a better player today than he was a year ago. But it's, he's at a time of his career where results matter.
Totally. He's pressing up against the ceiling of the top of the ranking board too. I think he was around number 10 when he finished the year last year, and he's now 14, but it's not as easy to move up the rankings the higher you get, right? It's one spot is crazy. One spot's 10 for earlier. So, I think 2022 could be a big year for him. Like we've probably always said, the sky's the limit for him, right? So it's going to be, hopefully he has a good offseason, restful, and feels good coming into 2022. Talking about Felix, let's talk about it. 39 wins, a lot of wins, 24 losses this year. No titles again, which is obviously something that people talk about with him. I think he had 2 finals, but he made the Wimbledon quarterfinals, US Open semifinals, career high ranking now in the top 10, which is big. How would you assess his season? What he told me after Stockholm is he felt like he'd matured a lot, and he kind of found more of his identity on court, because maybe when he grew up, when he was everyone has a big shots, everyone has big serves, everyone can hit the ball hard in the men's game. It's you got to find what do you do that differentiates you? And I do feel like he found a lot more of that, and that might have been Tony Nadal's influence a bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is a positive effect on him. Felix has always probably been the most talented guy on the court growing up in the sport. And if you don't have the work ethic, which he obviously does, then it doesn't do you, too good at this level. It's fun. I talked to him prior to the Australian Open about his goals, and you talked about how Dennis said, I don't really have any goals at the end of the year. Felix has been adamant that top 10 was his goal this year. And, he reached it, and he's only going to reach it for a week because of Jannik Sinner winning a match in the ATP final, but he did it, so give him credit. And it wasn't a Grand Slam win, and it wasn't winning a Masters or just even winning a tournament, as you point out. It was a top 10. And I think that, that goes again to consistency. You're not a top 10 player unless, you're getting deep into tournaments that you're in. So you got to give him credit on that. I think, his serve can be such a weapon, and it was at the US Open. And it's also been such a mess at times in his career. The ball toss, the double faults, and you still see it creep in. But I think that is a huge improvement. I think his backhand suddenly was a weapon this year. And he called me on it when I said, where does his backhand come from? And he said, I've always had a backhand. I'm starting to use it properly. It's, you can always hit a good backhand, but the timing and stuff. And I think he's really learned how to game plan some of these matches and to use that against certain opponents. So I think overall he's in a great place. We get fixated on losing in the finals. We're not the only ones. Analysts talk about it. Coaches talk about it.
Yeah.
And you often hear about, Felix shutting down in a match. And I think it's gotten way better. But when things aren't going well, how quickly things can go south. Losing to Aslan Karatsev, the Australian Open, up 2 sets to love. And then once Karatsev had momentum, I felt like Felix had no chance. You can just read it. Now, same situation against Zverev at Wimbledon, and he wins that match in 5 sets. I think that's a huge growth. Same thing against Bautista Agut at the US Open. Yeah. But, Medvedev, he's going toe-to-toe, and then it just, Daniil did what Daniil does, and Felix didn't have a counterpunch. And I think for those big, for those toughest opponents in the biggest matches, he's going to get knocked down, and he needs to, dust himself off and go, okay, let's play that game, and because then you're seeing some of the errors creep up. So at least you're seeing progress in those areas, and it's going to be exciting just to see, where he goes moving forward, just because he's, again, as just a fan of the sport, it's so fun to watch him. and few players, if any, work as hard as he does. And that's a great, trait to have in this sport, because, as good as the Rafas and the Novaks are, they don't get outworked. They
Totally.
They probably have been humbled at certain times in their career, and know, as good as we are, as many titles as we have, this young kid from Canada is hungry, so I better work harder than them, and I'll show them, who's boss. And so it's all part of the growth,
Totally.
I guess, of this career that Felix is on.
Totally. You said it there. Like the top guys, it's crazy how much Djokovic, Federer, Nadal, like they like want it as much or more than these guys who haven't achieved really anything in the sport, which is so hard to play against. But I think you're right. Like Felix, you can see, I think the pressure sometimes kind of affects his body when he's out there. His shots get a bit whippy, just adding too much spin, not hitting through the court enough, which he can obviously do. But I think, for the US Open at the most, until the Medvedev match, I think we really saw the identity in his game, where he's like, serve can be an absolute weapon. When he's getting his first serve in and coming behind it, it's hard to stop. He's a freight train, and he can be in a really aggressive player. Because I've seen him try and be an aggressive player only from the baseline before, and it's just harder to do that. And when I think he's like 6'2", 6'3", somewhere in there, like and super long, got a good wingspan. It's like coming forward just brings so much advantage with it, and he seemed super comfortable. I remember like the TFO match, I was just like, oh, this isn't even close. Like Felix is just really at another level when he's playing it in that way, which was cool to see. Still 21 years old. I think one of the journalists, after he lost to Shapovalov, somehow brought up the fact that he hadn't won a title yet, and it was just like obviously not a good time for it. But I think Felix is a fighter, and he's definitely going to use the kind of the hate that he's getting from people. I've seen it on our channel as motivation. And when he gets that title, which I believe will be next year, it's going to be a big fist pumping and like stick it to everyone else. It'll be cool.
And I don't want to pretend like I hang out with Felix every day and know him personally, but he's like, from all accounts, he's really strong mentally. And obviously it goes without saying how important that is to be a professional athlete. But I don't think his finals record. I think he knows it. I think that he's as disappointed as anybody, but also, he understands that no one has bigger expectations than he does. So regardless of what someone might say on your discussion board or on TSN, it's like, I've heard it all. I know it all. I say it to myself, but you kind of have to channel that out, because, you need to really harness in the positivity in a sport where more often than not, you're coming away disappointed. Unless you win a tournament, you're probably pissed off with your result.
Yeah. Which is tough. Let's talk about now. Let's go on to Bianca Andreescu, the original Canadian queen. Well, maybe that's Jeannie Bouchard. I don't know. But Andreescu, super interesting last couple of years, right? This year she went 17-12, no titles. Made the Miami Open final at the beginning of the year, and I was thinking like, okay, she's kind of right back to form here. And she said, openly, she's pretty open in press conferences, which I love. And she said, how much the pandemic really did affect her training. And, I think she made a coaching switch in that time as well. So, do you have any insights into kind of like I'm not worried about her career in the slightest. She's 21 years old still. She's obviously won the US Open, which is just like, that was crazy. Probably an overachiever at that point in her career. So she's now building for like the rest of her career. And how do you see like her form right now in 2021 tying into that kind of storyline?
Yeah, and I understand people being critical of Bianca, because their introduction to Bianca was a tennis player who never lost, right?
Yeah.
Like 2019, Indian Wells, Rogers Cup, US Open. It's like this woman, when she does play, remember she had all those injuries that year too.
Yeah.
She doesn't lose. And then suddenly it's, here's another injury. And that's, and then the mixed results. And I agree with you. Miami Open, thought she played great. I thought, here she is, she's back. She got hurt in the final. She had to retire against Barty. Yeah. And then from there, for whatever reason, she just never was able to get any kind of rhythm going. And, I was really surprised. She lost this kind of epic first round match to Zidansek at the French Open, and she went on that magical run. And, I keep waiting for her to break out on the grass surface, and I'm sure that'll happen at some point, but it seems to take maybe younger players a little bit longer just because they have a lack of reps on that surface. I liked what I saw at the US Open. And I think without the injury against Sakari, she wins that match, and maybe we're having a different discussion. But again, it's like, well, but she's, it's another injury. Like, when is she ever going to be healthy? I think you hit the nail on the head. So many changes at a young age. Her life has changed. She, again, there's no one's going to be sympathetic towards someone who's making millions of dollars and doing commercial shoots, but that takes away from other parts of your life. And I know being away from her family, was a huge effect on her playing career. Being with Sven Grunwald, who coached, Sharapova, among others, different coach than Sylvain Bruno. And we've only gotten a small taste of what that relationship is going to be like. So I'm encouraged to see and excited to see what the next season is. Again, knock on wood that she stays healthy. But my forecast for her is the same as what I said after the US Open. I think she's going to win multiple majors, but I also think she's going to go through stretches where she doesn't play well, or she just doesn't play because of injuries. Like, I can't sit here and say, you know what, now that she's past this latest injury, which I can't remember what the latest injury is, she's going to be healthy. Like, that's not who Bianca is, unfortunately. Like, as a junior, she should have won the Australian Open, but had a foot injury. And the story that I've told a lot of times, and I think I told it with you earlier this year, I was at the US Open in 2018, and she was in qualies in the first round, losing and getting medical timeouts for her back. And she was on some outer court with nobody watching. And then a year later, she won the whole friggin' tournament.
Yeah.
That, for whatever reason, she's just an athlete that, things creep up, and maybe it's just her aggressive style of play. We've talked about it with Rafa, how he gets hurt maybe a little bit more than Roger has gotten hurt in his career, although the timing of that isn't great with yesterday's news with Fed. But that's her style of play. She plays, she is a bull out there for lack of better comparisons. And so the next big run from her, but I think everyone needs to relax a little bit. And if you're a Canadian tennis fan, the good thing is all of our hopes and dreams are not on one player. Right? As this episode shows you, we're talking about 4 players. So she'll be back. And when she is back, I'm sure everyone will fall back in love with her again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And I think, I don't worry. I'm not worried right now. It is confusing how many injuries she's had, but it could be like, honestly, still like growing pains. Like, people's bodies are changing a lot still at 19, 20, 21 years old. So hopefully that will get less. But she's got the game. We all know that. Everyone knows that she has the game, and she's absolutely potent out there when she's healthy. And now that brings us to the last, definitely not the least, I would say most successful in a way, definitely year of 2021 for Canadian tennis players. And that is Leylah Annie Fernandez, who I like to say runs New York now. She's like the mayor of New York, because she had that crowd on, like, she was playing them like a fiddle. She was just, even in her runners-up speech, I was laughing. Like, she was just like, she knew exactly what to say, like talking about the firefighters, about 9/11. I feel like they love her down there. And the style of tennis she played to get to the final, and the route she took to the final, mind-blowing. She had a good year before that. Obviously, she won Monterrey. She was 25-17 on the year. But I don't think anyone was expecting her to make the US Open final in the preview of the US Open final. Like, she wasn't at that level yet, but then she showed us that her top level and her game is unbelievable. So what was it like to watch that up front at the US Open, and what were your thoughts?
Definitely the story of the tournament. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not being a biased Canadian. The little bit of TV that I watched in New York was like ESPN Sports Center. At that time of the year, it's all football, obviously. The NFL is getting going. College football has begun. And Leylah was the only tennis story that would make it on a Sports Center. Not Novak Djokovic going for the Grand Slam and going for 21st. It was Leylah. And it was, she was a teenager for about half the tournament. But, it's just what she was able to do. And, it was totally, I mash so much, compare that to Bianca. And it was a totally different experience in that, you know, Leylah obviously went into that match against Osaka in the third round, and 20,000 people went into Arthur Ashe Stadium there to watch Osaka play some little scrappy Canadian I've never heard of. You know, obviously we know who Fernandez is, but you know, the very general tennis fan that you get at a tournament like the US Open probably doesn't know who she is. And they're giving her a standing ovation at the end. And, you know, so we do all these, we call them flash interviews, the interviews on the court. And Felix is playing at the same time against Bautista Agut. And he's up 2-0 and that's our focus. We got to get on a court for that. And Fernandez is down a set and down a break. Okay, we're obviously not going to do that interview because she's not going to win. Felix starts losing, and Leylah suddenly breaks Osaka, who's serving for the match, and then wins the tie break, and then breaks right away in the third, and we're hustling back, and then it just takes off from there. And yeah, you're like, New York was eating out of her palm from there. And I like to think that I'm focused and professional, and I'm walking out on court, and I've been able to do that a few times at Arthur Ashe Stadium. And I'm caught doing this, like looking around and going, what the hell is, you know, not to take anything away from what Bianca did, which was amazing. She won the tournament, and the fans obviously supported her. Nothing like this. The sound, and I don't know if again, we talked about fans being back at the US Open. I don't know if it was that. I don't know if it's because of her style. I don't know if it's because this 19-year-old is doing this to the crowd. Like, who has the presence of mind? But it was crazy. And then, you know, she plays Kerber, Svitolina, Sabalenka, you know, and all these players I kind of felt bad for, because they've all etched these great careers, and the crowd is with this young Canadian who, again, as you point out, nobody saw coming there except for her. And I'll give her credit, because on media day we had her up on our set, and I don't know how it even came up, but she said, "I'll see you at the end of the tournament." And I think I just dismiss it because every player says that, right? Or a lot of players. And that's Leylah. She has her expectations have always been high on herself. I always felt like maybe too high, and she was too hard on herself. And she's also got this very cheery, you know, and we saw it, such an endearing quality of her personality. And after she lost to Raducanu, and, you know, and again, the greatest day of her life turned into the worst day of her life because she lost. And that's how a tennis player thinks. And after we finished, she looked at me and said, "I told you." And I said, "What would you, sorry?" And she's like, "I told you I was going to be here at the end." I thought to myself, you know what? You're effing right. You know, you did, like, you did say that. Like, why? I should have brought that up in the interview, but I just, you know, 2 weeks fly by, and anyways, but it's like, she called it. And I don't know, you know, where she's obviously got the fight in her. She runs down every ball. She frustrates opponents. But yeah, it was such an amazing story to cover, to have a small part in, to be out on the court. Everyone was in love with her. You know, you pointed out, like, her post-match speech after losing, like, America fell in love with her. If they had, I had Americans next to me and tears going down their face. I'm not exaggerating here. When she brought up, you know, you bring up 9/11 and everyone's got a spot, especially in that country. So just like, selfishly, a moment I'll never forget, or moments that I'll never forget, and how she was just like, she'd be down in matches and you're like, she's going to pull this off, isn't she? Like, it's just like, I don't know how, you know, Sabalenka would be just smoking balls by her. And it's like, and then suddenly the veteran who's top 5 in the world is cracking at the most important times. And Leylah elevated her game. Like, that was crazy.
It was crazy. And she played such a brand of tennis that I think was maybe refreshing for the US Open crowd to see, because in the last few years we've seen on the men's and women's, but especially on the women's, like, the best players are like smashing the ball, and they can just hit the ball on both wings. Like, you think of like an Osaka or like an Andreescu, or, you know, originally a Serena Williams, but she's kind of playing a different style of tennis that's working, and it's like redirecting pace. It's her lefty forehand has got such pop to it. It's not like she doesn't have big strokes herself, but she's, you know, got like a slighter build. And I think the US crowd, and Canadians obviously do too, love like the underdog story. And then she was definitely the underdog in every match she played up until the final. I thought it was like, I don't even know who's the underdog here. They're both underdogs. Like, it's just insane.
Yeah. Like, she played Kaya Kanepi in the second round. And I think maybe most people thought, well, Kanepi's a veteran who's had success here. She'll probably win.
Yeah.
And that was out on like court 10.
Yeah.
And, and Fernandez won obviously that match too. So it wasn't as like, it didn't even just start with Osaka, although our attention, or most people's attention was started at that match. But
yeah.
And just, again, what a role model too. And I try to tread water with putting those expectations on these young athletes. Like, they didn't necessarily sign up to be a role model, but it comes with kind of with the territory of being a professional athlete. And, for how many people have been told, you probably can't do that. Like, oh, you want to start up a tennis podcast in Victoria? Yeah, man, that's never going to work. And look at you, like, you're doing it, right? And how many people told Leylah, you're probably going to need to be 5'10" and have a big serve to have any kind of success, especially on a hard court, or, and she brought up, the teacher that was like, yeah, you probably want to like work on school and focus on, maybe be a doctor or a lawyer. Like, who's a tennis player and makes millions of dollars? Well, she's about to make millions of dollars. So it's just, and it was so genuine and heartfelt. And obviously I got to give a shout out to my colleague, Mark Masters, in the interviews he had with Jorge, her father, who was in Florida the whole time, and just breaking down, talking about what it's like to be a Canadian. It was just like, oh my God, like, if you didn't win us over by now, like everyone was just, so like, so won over, and just, invested in her story for 2 weeks. It was so cool to have a front row seat, and it made it easy for me to follow the matches, because even when I couldn't watch the match, where we're situated is outside the bowl of Arthur Ashe Stadium, and the building starts shaking when Fernandez wins points. And when Svitolina wins points, it's
it's like golf claps.
Like, oh my God, like, I don't know how she did this, but she did.
Yeah, she's just got star power, I think, and it's like in the rawest form. And I got goosebumps when you brought up the Jorge interview that Mark Masters did. Yeah, it was like literally like I was choking up watching that, and just to see how much it meant to their family to represent Canada. And I think that that's such a great tie into like what Canada is, right? It's like, there's people that are born here, there's people that move here, and we're all Canadians, and that's like, it's just like this amazing group. And I think the four top players that we just talked about really represent that well, right? It's kind of like a lot of different parts of the world represented, but they all love Canada and they all love representing Canada. And I'm so stoked on Canadian tennis. Proud of where these four players have gotten to. It's unbelievable. Like, we have one of the strongest tennis nations in the world right now. Definitely. And we're a pretty small country, and, it's not a lot of people here play tennis actually compared to like a lot of other sports. So let's talk quickly about 2022 and our expectations going into it. Because if like everyone wants to go to the next level and be like, okay, we made a slam final, we got to get at least one slam victory next year, like type things. Like we all think, and probably all four of them have the ability to win a slam. But my unpopular opinion is that I think it's unrealistic for us to expect a grand slam in 2022. We can hope for it, which I do. I don't think it's realistic to put that expectation on them, because I don't think any of them are at the point right now where it like makes sense that they're going to win a slam in 2022. What do you think?
I think that's fair. Like you have a handful of players in the world where you could say, I expect them to win a grand slam. Like it's so difficult to do. Everything needs to line up. You need to be healthy at the right time. You need to be good for 2 weeks and win 7 matches. So outside of the Djokovic's and, on the women's side, most consistent player this year was probably Ash Barty. When Osaka is going and in a good place, you would say the same thing for her. I think the expectation should be taking another step forward, and you could go in so many different directions with all the Canadians for that. Just because Leylah made a US Open final, she could have a successful year and not go past, say, a quarterfinal at a Grand Slam. And a lot of people might say, well, she reached the US Open final. Yeah, but she had better results at the 1000 event. And you just saw a little more consistency and some more growth because, she played in a quarterfinal and she played a red hot Osaka. There's no shame in that. So, Felix and Dennis, it'd be nice to see one of them reach a final at one of
Yeah.
the slams, just because that would make another step forward. And I think the opportunity is there more so than maybe even a year ago, where Djokovic is there, but you know, we still don't know where Rafa's game is at and where his health is at. We know that Roger isn't what he used to be, and he's not even going to play until the second half of the year. Medvedev has kind of overtaken and been the next gen, if you want to call him that, to, you know, jump into that Grand Slam pool and win one.
Yeah.
For those guys, I'd like to see, you know, obviously with Dennis, we talked about more consistency, but also just more success at the other big tournaments, the Masters. You know, get into more quarters and semis at those events, gain some more points, and not just have to feast on, you know, no disrespect to the Stockholm Open, but the 250s, right? And just, you know, that's your next big test that, you know, the best players in the world will be there. So for those guys, I think the 1000s and the Grand Slams, to have more success and consistent success, and maybe try to get into the second week of the slams 2 or 3 times in 2022, as opposed to just once or twice. You know, for Leylah, I kind of touched upon it, just to play that level of tennis throughout the year. You saw a big dip after winning Monterey, but you know, obviously, you know, the US Open is going to do so much for her confidence. For Bianca, I think it's less about results and more how many tournaments are you playing, because I think if she plays, it means she's relatively healthy. And I think if she's playing and she's relatively healthy, the rest takes care of itself. I think that she has just so much game that she'll have her results, and the rest goes from there. And whether that means reaching quarters or semis or winning a tournament here or there, I think that is the next step forward for her, to just be playing the majority of the 1000s, playing, like, knock on wood, play all 4 majors in a calendar year, which she's not been able to do.
Would be nice.
Even in that magical 2019 season, you know, played the US Open. That was, you know, and sorry, she did play the French Open, but she had a withdrawal. So yeah, that would be my expectations for the Canadians. I think it's going to be another fascinating year, and a shout out to a guy like Milos Raonic. Like, I want to see him play. You know, I hope this isn't the end. He's been so great for Canadian tennis. I don't know what you can expect from him at this point outside of the big serve. But, you know, let's hope that, you know, we don't get some posting on Instagram that says it's been a great career and I'm done, because I know that he's got a lot of opportunities outside of tennis. Really smart guy. But, you know, what was his last tournament? Like, it was Atlanta? Like,
I don't know.
You know, like, I don't want that to be a legacy, right?
That's a good point. We can't put any, like, it's kind of disrespectful to leave him off this list, but it is the top 4 players right now. Milos Raonic, our guy, friend of the show. Yeah, I don't think he's retiring. Hopefully not. I think we'll probably see him in Delray, and then at the Australian Open. But yeah, I don't know. I think in general, I think you did a great kind of setup for these 4 players going into 2022. Expectations can be heavy, and I think, you know, especially, you know, Felix and Dennis have worn those pretty heavily for a few years now. But I think we're going to see some special tennis in 2022 from the Canadian crew. Mark Rowe, thank you so much for joining the Slice today, and, you know, giving your thoughts and breaking it down. I'm excited to see the TSN coverage in 2022. Where can people find you online?
Twitter at TSN TV, Instagram MarkRowe8, and you can see me on TSN on a bunch of different platforms.
That's right. Anyways, thanks for joining the show. Slice people, thank you for subscribing, liking the video, and stay tuned for some more topic related videos in the fall here in the tennis off season, preparing for the Australian Open. Best time of the year, in my opinion. We'll see you guys later. Thanks for coming on, Joe. Thanks for coming on, Mark, not Joe. And we'll see you guys next time.